Well, hey there, friends. It's me, the Yellow Hat Man, and I thought I'd tell all of you about the time that I met my very best friend, Curious George. Now, when I was helping outside and walking the hallways, I could tell that a lot of people didn't know who I was, and here I thought I was super famous. So I'm going to tell you a story about how I met George, and just turns out somebody else knew the story and wrote a book about us. So here we go. This is George. He lived in Africa, and he was a good little monkey, always very curious. It's true, he's so very curious. One day, George saw a man. He had a large yellow straw hat. Who do you think that guy was? The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, I thought. I'd like to take him home with me. So he put his hat on the ground, and of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. He picked it up and he put it on. Do you remember that, George? That's crazy. Why do you keep trying to smell me, George? Always so curious. The hat covered George's head. He couldn't see it. I picked him up quickly, popped him into a bag, caught him. Then I put my big yellow hat on, and George, we went on the little boat. And a sailor rowed us both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a little stool, and I said, "George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You'll like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into any trouble." Now George promised me he'd be good, but it's easy for little monkeys to forget. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try it. It looked so easy, but I bet all of you can guess what George did. That happened. First this, and then this. "Where's George?" The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water and almost all tired out. "Man overboard," the sailors cried as they threw him a lifebelt. George caught it and held on. At last, he was safe and on board. Look at all that water he threw up. That was not a good choice, George. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey, until at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and I, with the man with the yellow hat, walked off the ship and onto the shore and into the city's main house. After we got to my house, we had a good meal. George felt very tired. He crawled into bed and he fell asleep. It was a long day for George. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. And then I went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What fun. A lot of you have probably never even seen a phone like that before. It's pretty old. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the telephone. "Hello, hello," they said, but there was no answer. When they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call came from, they didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. I just can't leave that George alone for 1 minute. Hurry, 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 the fireman jumped onto the fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Everybody hurried out of the way. Hurry, hurry, hurry. The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. There was no fire, only a naughty little monkey. Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wire. And then a thin fireman caught one arm and a fat fireman caught the other. You fooled the fire department, they said. We will have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm. They took him away and shut him in a prison. That was pretty big. George wanted to get out. He climbed up the window. He tried the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got out the wooden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy, and the bed tipped up. The watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the door. He hurried through the building and ran out onto the roof, and then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked on the telephone wires, quickly and quietly over the guard's head. George walked away. He was free. Down in the street outside the prison walls stood a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon, so he reached over and tried to help himself. But instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose, and in an instant the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Oh, man. Up he sailed, higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses, and the people like dolls. George was very frightened. He held on very tight. At first, the wind blew in great gusts. Then it quieted. Finally, it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump, onto the top of the traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do, and then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down, and he saw, guess who? He saw me, the man with the yellow hat. It's a good thing I was on that street that day. George was very happy. The man was happy too. George slid down the post, and then I, with the big yellow hat, put him under my arm. Then I paid the balloon man for all those balloons, and then George and me climbed into the car, and at last we went away. I don't have that old blue car anymore. I've got an old yellow car because yellow is my favorite color. To the zoo we went. What a nice place for George to live. Now, that was the book about how we met. If you've read some Curious George books since then, you know that him and I are best friends, and we live together now. George didn't like the zoo very much. He was too curious, and he kept getting out. So there's a ton of our stories in the library. You should check them out sometimes. Well, anyways, thanks for letting me visit your school today. I'll be walking around, and I'll probably see you. Feel free to say hi to me and George. Have a good one.